morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy on the road. I hope you are well wherever you are and that you are enjoying your time worshiping together. Today, we're continuing our question series, and our question for today was, is there really polygamy in the Bible? And as you've read from our Genesis text, yes is the answer to that question. Many of the patriarchs had multiple wives as well as concubines and maidservants who were a part of the family giving birth to the children. This was very common in the culture at the time. The Bible, contrary to what some will have you believe, the Bible does not really have a laid out understanding of what marriage should be. It kind of contradicts itself, as the Bible does sometimes, because there are so many different writers and so many different time periods and so many different ways to interact with God. But I think overall, if you're looking for a way to connect to God in your marriage, connect to God in your relationships, I think the best thing that God would want you to understand is an understanding of care and fidelity and love and what that means. We look to God as our example, God and Jesus, and the stories of how God interacts with God's people as ways to inform our lives, and especially as ways to teach us about love and about relationships. And so I've also included the scripture from 1 Corinthians 13. It's often called the love verse. You've seen it at weddings. You've seen it. It's everywhere. And I think what Paul is writing about in this scripture, he's talking about how a community of Christians in the early church have to work together to emulate God's love and find a way to love each other. And I think this is a great example of how a family should work, in that we are, our first response is patience. Our first response is kindness. This is how we strive to follow God's example in the parts of our lives that end up affecting other people, especially in our relationships. So whether it's your marriage, whether you are simply dating someone, whether it is your best friend or your brother, following God's example in love is really important. When it comes to marriage itself, in the marriage, we talk about fidelity and what it means to work through our problems and what it means to take that promise we make seriously. It's one of the things that's really important, is that when we make promises, let your word be your word. Jesus kind of calls us to task for that. When we make promises, we need to follow through. So often, marriages are broken apart because of breaking of those promises, whether that's through abuse, through infidelity, through all kinds of reasons. And the Bible has a lot to say about divorce. Divorce is not God's preferred route, but I think that, and I know that God is true and God is faithful, and that God would rather us be safe and in a good place as divorced people than God would want us to be abused and hurt as married people. So leave your questions below. We're going to talk about fidelity and love and how to actually care for another person. Not the specifics of what is or is not a biblical marriage, but what it is, what it means to love and care for another human being, and especially in that marriage, that context of marriage. What does it mean to actually care and to live into your covenant? Leave your comments, and I'll see you next week.